Do you think the dragons were made using practical effects or green screen? And how much muscle do you think Michelle Rodriguez gained to play a barbarian in Dungeons & Dragons? Honor Among Thieves? Which D&D monster are you most excited to see on the big screen? Like, there are a number of monsters in the film that actually come from the original board game, like, say, owlbears, which is a monstrosity that Doric can turn into a druid. When asked how they were able to handle her transformations, Sophia Lillis revealed that that was one of the few effects done with the use of CGI, but clarifying they did as much with practical effects as they possibly could. Our heroes also face off against displacer beasts and mimics, and even a gelatinous cube that may be in the movie for a reason. Whenever Jonathan Goldstein would play the game with his older brother as a kid,
I'd fall into a gelatinous cube every time.
And trust us, he has not forgotten it.
I had to get my revenge on my older brother. Look at me now, Dan.
Just like you shouldn't forget to hit that subscribe button for more movie trivia. Going back to the movie's practical effects for a minute here, did you realize that the dragons were made using puppets? Okay, well, they weren't made using only puppets. Regé-Jean Page revealed that the dragons were a mix between kind of Jim Henson-esque puppetry and green screen. Regé-Jean found it very interesting to be acting opposite this huge creature that's half in your imagination and half in the real world. He found that the puppets would often give such scary good performances that it would sort of inspire him as an actor, often leaving him thinking, nah, you're not gonna act me out of this. That's not happening. While Hugh Grant, on the other hand, joked that he found the dragons to be annoying, because during moments where he thought, I'm rather good in this shot, he'd look closer and see one of the bloody dragon things walks through the background of the shot.
So I'm hoping the creatures are largely going to be cut out of this film, right?
But the costumes for this movie were no laughing matter. They had to be made perfectly, because many of these characters would be wearing the same thing throughout the entire filming process. And like most of the cast didn't really have a problem with that, but Sophia Lillis had to deal with some major wardrobe malfunctions. She had to wear 2 corsets at all times, and any time that she needed to get out of it to go to the bathroom,
it took like a good 40 minutes.
The only part of her costume that was done using CGI was her tail. Otherwise, it was all real. Sophia had to wear a wig with a metal bit underneath, and her magnetic horns stuck out through holes in the wig. And her ears were prosthetics, and they would sort of get in her way whenever it came time for her to perform her stunt work. Oh, and speaking of stunt work, Sophia Lillis had to do a lot to play Doric. She mostly had to focus on learning how to roll both forward and backward.
I'm not really an acrobatic person, but the character was.
And Sophia wasn't alone. Michelle Rodriguez had a trainer come in to work with her every day, helping her to gain 10 pounds worth of muscle for her role as a barbarian.
It was great, actually. Hadn't done that since I was in my 20s.
And what about Chris Pine, you may be wondering?
Really, she was training, I wasn't.
Chris actually enjoyed making himself look as bad as possible, to the point that the directors had to remind him to look heroic in some scenes. He seems intent on being the lamest hero in the Forgotten Realms. Do you know where this movie is supposed to take place? As we mentioned before, it's set in the fictional Forgotten Realms, and it explores a few familiar locations like the city of Neverwinter and the frozen wastelands of Icewind Dale. Although, the movie does plan on taking us to places never seen in the games before. But in order to bring these fantastical places to life, the crew needed to take filming someplace equally as magical. And where better to go than the magical lands of Northern Ireland? The movie was shot out of a number of gorgeous historical sites throughout the UK, like the Carrickfergus Castle, and this definitely helped to capture that Tolkien-like universe that Roy Lee mentioned earlier. But if they ever did need to build an original set, Sophia Lillis made it clear that production wasn't afraid to do that. The movie isn't only inspired by the games, it's growing the game's lore. The film's writers have been working closely with the game's publishers, Wizards of the Coast, and they noticed right away there were things that posed challenges. One problem was that the script opened up with a prison right at the beginning, but until that point, there had never been a prison in the D&D world, and so Wizards of the Coast helped to build the writers' ideas into the existing lore, helping them to decide things like who would run such a prison. D&D artist Jeremy Jarvis wanted to make sure the writers understood that this civilization has been there for a while, so there's layers to it. And the writers definitely tried to make that clear in the movie, but considering how long they've had to work on it, we wouldn't expect anything less. These characters are not your average heroes. co-director Jonathan Goldstein wanted to tell a story set in a fantasy environment, using characters who were not superheroes. Instead, he wanted all of them to be incredibly flawed. This would do a better job of making the movie feel like the board game, because when you play D&D, you roll your character's characteristics, and you don't always get a 20. As he put it,
Some of these guys have clearly rolled like a 4.
but that doesn't mean they stay that way.
Over the course of the movie, they level up.
Jonathan may be trying to distance the movie from superheroes, but his description definitely makes sense with the way that producer Roy Lee put it. A Guardians of the Galaxy tone movie in a Tolkien-like universe. Now, we wonder how many of our stars were familiar with the universe before being cast in it. Which member of the cast do you think was the biggest D&D fan? Well, if you guessed Chris Pine, you'd actually be wrong, sorry. He never even played the board game before being cast in the movie, but luckily he actually had a really great teacher.
My nephew plays it religiously and has for years.
When he found out that his super cool uncle had a role in the movie, they got together with a couple of family members to play the game. Chris described the group as being essentially all actors and former actors, and he said that this really helped him enjoy the game more because
It is just like improv class.
otherwise, Michelle Rodriguez has been playing the game for years. In fact, her Fast and the Furious co-star Vin Diesel is a mega fan, but Sophia Lillis is definitely the best player in the group. Her co-stars have called her
The LeBron of D&D.
and playing through high school definitely helped her become more familiar with the monsters in the movie. Oh, that funny Hugh. It's a good thing he has a sense of humor because that's a big part of the reason why he's here. To most of the cast in Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves makes sense. Chris Pine has served as the leading man to the franchise like Star Trek and Wonder Woman before, and Sophia Lillis has been a huge fan of D&D since high school, which may explain why she was willing to put up with so much for the role. But what about someone like Hugh Grant, who's not only unfamiliar with the game, well, he's also avoided appearing in big franchises for years now. Even he'd tell you that when he first heard he was being considered for a role in the new Dungeons & Dragons movie, the only thing he thought was, I don't think so. But when he actually sat down to read the script, he found that the big appeal of the movie was the fact that it genuinely made him laugh. Dungeons & Dragons was almost an entirely different movie. This is one of those projects that's been stuck in development for years, having been teased all the way back in 2013. Since then, it's traded hands from studio to studio, and it's had a number of intriguing names attached to it. In 2016, a version of the movie was planned that would be directed by Rob Letterman and starring Ansel Elgort. Joe Manganiello was working on the script, while Dwayne Johnson and Brad Payton were in talks to develop it. Now, all this was before Hasbro decided to move the rights over to Paramount Pictures in 2017, forcing them to start again with a new cast and crew. But it's hard to say how much the writers may have taken from Joe Manganiello's finished script. The movie we got may not have been the movie that was planned, but you can see the passion that this cast has for the source material. Which part of the game are you most excited to see on screen? Or what do you think was handled the best? We love to hear your thoughts, so don't forget to make them heard down below.